way. And in particular, when you talked about, for instance, the juice killings, the girls that were killed, in the film, you have to remember that particularly if you're going to deal with the issue of the IceMan inheritance, you have to also study the psychological impact that has had on other people. We as a people have been living in physical proximity with white people for over 500 years. So it's not unusual for me or for any of us here to see that many of our people have adopted the Ice Age tolerance level. Okay, so what I'm saying is that when you see black youth doing what they're doing, that is a culmination of a lot of things that has gone down.
Very right. Good point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's not what I meant. What I meant was that in traditional cultures before Europe expanded, okay, there was aggression among other races and groups other than white men. I just wanted to make that point. I'm not saying that everybody else was sweetness and light and the Europeans alone were nasty. However, I agree with you wholly. You cannot... I'm right now involved in this business. Maybe it's not known here, but Toronto is right now in the middle of a controversy over quote, race and crime, unquote, as if you can separate race, crime, society that people have been exposed to for a long time, plus socioeconomic problems, okay? I agree with you. I mean, everybody now has been exposed to Caucasoid violence in every conceivable way, from obsolescent violence toward, obsolescent production, violence toward nature, to pornography, toward violence in films. I'm not saying what you think I'm saying, I don't think. I mean, I'm not saying that just because black youths commit X amount, blacks are, are more criminal. Obviously not. What I'm saying is that these people have been exposed to a very violent culture for too long, and that's why I pleaded with the audience that if there's anything we can do is to stop this culture of violence. I don't know if I'm getting across now, but...
Well, I'll just take it from there. I would like both of you gentlemen to comment on the current rise and unification of Germany, and what is the rise of this particular strain, because they're in the news everywhere. I mean, the skinheads, the neo-Nazis, they are rising up, and nobody can afford to ignore that. No one can. And I'd like to hear your comments about that since you're dealing with that topic.
Well, I have always maintained that the greatest danger to this country is the rise of Nazism, some form of fascism, and that the communism was never the great danger that they made it out to be, that communism was the greatest danger to themselves. There's a rise in fear coming from the presence of two types of minorities, and the inability to put one successfully against the other, although they've had some success in this. And the realization that on a world basis and even on a national basis, very soon white's going to be the minority. And so people are flexing their muscles and hoping to make an impression before this is known to the victim. The unification of Germany was inevitable anyway, as the unification of Korea is inevitable. Germany might represent a threat in the world, but what bothers me, what I find rather peculiar, is that if a black person say he don't like filter fish, he's called anti-Semitic, and Jewish Defense League, and that is not fighting in it, and there's 150 anti-Jewish groups in America. Nobody's fighting in them. They're paramilitary, they got guns. Blacks have one dissident word. They have no guns to fight. They can't, powerless people can't do too much anyway, so Even if it were anti, and I don't think that's the case. Nazism is rising again in Germany, and the concept of Nazism is rising again in the United States, and screaming editorials against it. Somebody's agreeing with it.
I don't know if anybody's agreeing with it, but it's certainly on the rise. I went out in Canada, it's on the rise quite a bit too. I was hired just recently to go across Canada by bus with a group of skinheads undercover to get their values and whatnot. A film producer wanted to do a film about this new phenomenon arising. And it was frightening to me, number one, how many people there are. Because in every little town we stopped at, much smaller than yours, mostly down here, these guys were almost uncannily, you might say. People were coming out of the woodwork. Hundreds of people in little stuff like Medicine Hat, Alberta, or Brandon, Manitoba. And the first thing that struck me was the violence and anger of these people. And the next thing that struck me was how many of them there were. And I've been sitting in Toronto trying to convince Canadian media to do something about this, and I've gotten nowhere because nobody will take me seriously. But I think it's a very serious problem. I think within 5 or 10 years, we may be in trouble that's going to make Nazi Germany like a Sunday school picnic.
Give thanks to Brother Clarke and Mr. Bradley. It's always a pleasure to have Brother Clarke in the midst. Your spirit is so enormous that, it lifts mine. My question, Dr. Clarke, is you raised a point in the lecture that we shouldn't be concerned with the color, but we should be more concerned with culture, and you cannot be more right than that, because a lot of us forget that the first people to enslave us were not the Europeans, but were the Arabs, and a lot of Arabs look just like Africans in color, not necessarily in culture. So I'd like for you to, elaborate on how do you define racism, and why are we having so much violence amongst ourselves? Is it a problem or a strategy that the Europeans are using to eliminate our people?
Unfortunately and tragically, sometimes we have a lot of violence among ourselves because we have not mustered up the will and the technique and the nerve to take on our real enemy that is not ourselves. Thank you. The Arab is a mixture. I've often referred to the Arab as the bastard child of a bastard child. Human ways matter, dealing with the mixture of several people. And of course they were in the slave trade. After 2 generations of mixing with African women, they created kind of a dark-skinned Arab that they used to facilitate the East African slave trade. We don't know how few friends we've had in this world. We might not have had any. But every person we've ever befriended, in most cases, have turned on us ultimately. What we need to do is to befriend and defender of ourselves. Be careful about who we befriend. Defenders of ourselves. I think we put confidence in the wrong people, and we bought too many foreign toys and foreign religions and foreign ideals without examining them thoroughly. I don't think the Arab is basically different from the European. I think we've talked the situation as far as we can tonight.
One more person.
Okay, Mr. Bradley, how is your book received? And I also have a question for Dr. Clarke. And Dr. Clarke, you spoke about religion and how religion has been used to control people. This spirituality that you spoke of, Can you elaborate a little bit more about that? More detail?
When before man organized religion, and he had no rationalization. And when Africans adhered to spirituality other than religion, he tried to bring man in harmony with nature. With religion, you try to defy nature. And Africans believed that there was a spiritual force in the universe. He knew that he couldn't make a hurricane, he couldn't stop one. He knew that the spiritual force of the universe was in everything, including the tree. So he didn't have to go to a church and pray, because whoever was the God was in every living thing, and the tree and the water, and in himself. And when the Europeans came and built something called this, a church called this, the house of the Lord, the African laughed at him, because they said that the spiritual force that can make the wind and bring back the seasons, too large to fit into that small place. You people must be crazy. So what you're worshiping is not a religion at all. You're worshiping a foreigner's concept of a religion. And you need not feel guilty when you neglect it or walk away from it.
One more.
How well was your book?
Oh, that's right, yeah. Okay, it's not very well received among whites, except among some physical anthropologists. It's better received, I suppose, among non-whites, both Orientals and bloods. But some, like the young man who left here, seems to be angry at me for some reason. I still don't know what they've done. So, I mean, it depends, but naturally you don't expect whites to like it very much. In Canada, I have a very difficult time anybody even taking it seriously enough to interview me, except if they want to distort it. Then they're happy to interview me. But you have to expect all that.
All right, thank you. I must apologize for extending your time past your limit. But I felt that the discussion did not touch on several important points about genetics and paleoanthropology that could be brought out and shed some light on it. Dealing with the theory of orthogenesis, first of all, what Dr. Clarke was speaking about, the fact that the African man saw himself in context with everything in existence. This meant that the cosmos and the infinitesimal and all things, he was a part of that, and he had to define himself as a part of that. This relates to orthogenesis in that the seed that flows from generation to generation has a direction of its own. It has a direction that you could say is of God. And there is such a thing as a dead end in mutational process. The white race is in the process of a dead end. Genetically, they are not able to reproduce at the same level as other peoples. And this has been substantiated by their own studies. It has got down to the place to where they even masturbate to reproduce through artificial insemination and other scientific devices. I want to point out that Nazism came about as a result of Oswald Spengler's studies back in the early 1800s. And it was Hitler who read his studies and formulated Mein Kampf while he was in jail. From this position, it was said that the only way the white race could be saved was through certain devices that Hitler adopted. One of them is the elimination of people, non-productive people. Another way was through the arts, which Spengler said that the arts had shown that the European race was self-destructing. Now, it was Richard Nixon who came into order, came into power with the Nazism in 1968 after the white race was shocked by the riots. And from that, I'll wrap it up. But from that, we have been under an intensive Nazi national policy ever since. And that policy is in its last stages today. So all the people out here that run things, and even here in Chicago, the Jew, there's a Jew in charge of the Nazi party. So this is a whole process that black people with the state government and every area of society that we look at, we are looking at Nazi policy. And you can read your Mein Kampf and find that out. Thank you.
We got time for Dr. Clarke.
Give him the mic.
We'll just have to wait till Dr. Clarke.
We got all night. You might.
We got time for Dr. Clarke.
The germ of Nazism, totalitarianism, is so firm in the mind of the European is that you could not expect the defeat of Hitler and Germany to wipe it out, because before Hitler came to power, other people were advocating the same thing. The Teutonic origins theory had its greatest development at Columbia University and at Harvard University by professors there. At the same time, the racial theories of Winford Carter, who wrote The Rising Tide of Color, and another work called The Negro as a Beast in the Eye of the Image of God. And you haven't read the tremendous amount of racist literature produced in this country, and they said things worse than Hitler ever said. I don't know what everybody's so surprised about it. You ever read David Hume and all these people who justified slavery? I mean, hundreds of years before Hitler was born. And so it's nothing especially new, but you are newly discovering something that's been there all along. If we don't watch ourselves, this country, I thought, had Nixon not moved to Watergate, I think Nixon might have been a dictator. Might have eliminated the election, became America's first dictator. We're rather naive people in relationship, because we'd rather ever elect an intelligent president anyway. I think we need to be a little more alert, read more, think more. We need more study groups.
Yes. Yeah.
Be more protective of our community.
Yeah.
To wipe out all this degeneracy in our community, crack and crack them over, crack some heads and crack.
Again, we want to thank everyone for coming out. And the Worldwide One Deliverance Temple has been our host tonight. And we haven't seen Elder Nelson Brown. If he's around, wave your hands so everybody knows who you are. Here he comes up. So let's give this program a great big round of applause. We thank Dr. Clarke and Michael Bradley. And as they say, be careful out there.